Welcome back for another episode of the Download with Joe. I'm excited to have Troy here, the co-founder and CEO of PassiveLogic. Troy, thanks for joining us today.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
So let's set the scene right. There's been some incredible noise around PassiveLogic and just the continued evolution of our industry adopting technology. And maybe we'll start with an introduction as to who PassiveLogic is, but I want to also follow that on with your thoughts, just in terms of why AI as a strategy is now being taken seriously within real estate.
Yeah, sure. We can simplify PassiveLogic for the audience to start as thinking of three things. First, we make a fully autonomous platform for buildings and infrastructure. So you can think of that as the autonomous brain from an autonomous vehicle applied to buildings and infrastructural systems, and controlling all of those things in real time is based on the dynamics in the system or in the building. We make a AI data cloud that connects to those autonomous buildings so that you can both connect all of your buildings to our portfolio and launch AI agents on top of those buildings to go do work for you. And then we make a suite of software on top of that for users to all collaborate together amongst the built environments. There's a lot of different users, everything from engineers to installers to owner operators to tenants that all want tools to work with their building and collaborate with those autonomous buildings and each other. So that's the foundation of what PassiveLogic is. And if we think about why AI now and why AI in real estate, I think the first thing that people should really kind of connect with is there's a lot of AI technology that's being built and has been built over the last decade. People have now gotten this very personal experience in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, with things like ChatGPT and Claude. And that revolution is major across all industries. And what we're seeing now is the bringing together of what is this incredible revolution in a lot of different channels of ways AI is going to be used, but together with the individual consumer. We've all experienced it at this point, right? We all know what that looks like, and that transformation's happening. Think about Google for a moment. Huge transformation. How have you maybe just used Google for 20 years, assuming it to be the same, and it's completely disrupted now. I used Google 5% of what I used Google for a year ago, right? That's a major leader being completely disrupted by this new technology. And so every different industry, every CIO, every CEO is thinking about how is this going to affect me and what do I need to do to prepare for my industry?
Yeah. You're right about the Google. I mean, when I hear more stats about Google, I guess it would be alarming if I worked at Google, maybe. You mentioned buildings and infrastructure. I mean, one of the things about this industry, you kind of touched on it, Troy. I don't know if you meant to, but there's a huge amount of fragmentation, right? Like you think of the value chain. You kind of described a value chain without using the term value chain, but you have buildings being built all the way down to, I guess you could say, a building being repositioned or torn down. But like in between that, there's a lot of different people, and then you have different types of buildings, and then you mentioned infrastructure as well. Like maybe for the audience, like, is the scope all of that? Is the scope some of that? Is the scope starting beachhead and then going to grow to all of that? I think one challenge in this industry is just the raw fragmentation. Like people who don't know the industry, you obviously do, are kind of surprised like how fragmented things actually are. But
yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things in that question of scope. So one thing that is unique about PassiveLogic, not just in this industry, but as we engage with customers and investors and potential employees, is we recognize that fragmentation as the core problem. We believe that you can't address that fragmentation without defragmentation, meaning enough of an ecosystem that you can address all of the parts. And that's not the thing you're supposed to do. That's like startup 101, like pick one thing and just focus, right? But what I think we need to see here in this industry is how does AI then align with how do we defragment? How do we bring this together under a single roof that can combine it all together in a sensible way? And then how can we make that a decision point for any one of those actors along that value chain on their own without having to convince everybody else that it's important to them too? Does that make sense?
No, it does. It does make sense. No, it does make sense. Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. It's fascinating. I would add, like, I think there's been a lot of effort to deploy AI in buildings, but I think thus far, my sense is that we're still pretty much like in the first inning. Maybe not even in the first inning.
Yeah, not even.
Warming up.
Yeah, warming up maybe in the batter's box. I mean, do you think the fragmentation? You mentioned fragmentation being the core issue.
Yeah.
I guess I probably land with that as well. Like, it is probably the core issue, but do you think that, like, are you seeing on the flip side, like, the recognition, like, we want to deploy more technology in our buildings, we want to digitize to, but the fragmentation is the problem, or is it? I mean, what are you hearing from the market, I guess?
So let's maybe tease apart the AI part there
Sure.
for a moment, because in what is AI and how can it be put to use in the built environment? Because going back to the original part of this conversation, we talked about, people's experience today is largely like ChatGPT, right? So first thing to recognize is that's really driven into the market faster than other forms of AI for a few reasons. One, it's very tangible, right? Or maybe not tangible, it's communicatable, right? That's it. It appears very, very intelligent because it's incredibly fluent, and we can interact it in a lot of general purpose ways. But we also have to recognize that that's just a language model. That's just one very narrow lane of all the kinds of AI that we're going to put to work. And so I think right now there's an over-indexing in the general AI market on language models. And I, as well as I think a lot of AI leaders, are like, if you're going to AI today, do not go into language models. That is like, that is actually a maturing space already. There are millions of different other lanes in AI that have yet to be really getting that first base, second base kind of play. And so if we think about, like, okay, what are those other forms of AI in buildings? The other one that we've seen a bit of is what it called optimizers, right? So optimizers are, I've got a building automation system or some kind of control system, and I want to put some kind of optimizer on top. I want to tweak and tune the variables. So a premise there for us and how we thought of this market is that doesn't get me very far. Sure, I can achieve some energy efficiency, but there's two challenges in that space. One is do I achieve much given the constraints of the infrastructure I got? I've got these 30, 40-year-old control systems, and I'm trying to optimize whatever it exposes up to this cloud. And then two, is that really people's main driver? Is that what's going to get people off their chairs and say, I'm going to invest forward in technology in buildings or AI in buildings? And those are the two things we've seen really thus far, right? We've seen language models being deployed to a variety of different things. I still contend that language models, even though the opportunity is great, have yet to really seen meaningful use cases. Even in, other than you go to ChatGPT, just think about if you use Windows or Mac OS, you're still searching the way you used to search. It's not that great. Even if there's an integration, it's still not that great. You haven't seen these tools infiltrate existing software that you use in ways that doesn't seem bolted on or tacked on, right? So we still have a lot to do.
0 to 1 yet.
That's fair.
Yeah. So even the language models, which we are really doing well at in the industry, we haven't yet gone to the transformation of real tools that we use every day. And then we look at other kinds of lanes. full autonomy. That's one that we care a lot about, is how do I make buildings actually their own managers and their own decision makers so that they're making these sort of real-time adaptations to what's going on in the building. And then when you ask the building a question, that building can acknowledge, answer that question, and do something for you. So going from language models, which just answer questions, they don't do anything for you, to actionable AI that does something for you. We think that a lot more people are willing to put money down on actionable AI.
Yeah.
And then we look at all these other kinds of use cases when we think about AI as the operational side. How do we make operational efficiencies? How do we make, the efficiency of maintenance and management? How do we make it so, here's one that should speak to this audience. Today, even if you have the best BMS install in the world, and you have a great ERP system as a building owner, some consultant wrote a bunch of rules that give you alarms that everybody in the industry knows are either they're super spammy or super weak. They're not intelligent in any way. You're going to have a guy who receives those alarms. You're not going to let those alarms anywhere near your ERP system and spam actually your ticketing escalation system, because that would be crazy, because there's just so much crap in there. How can you just get to buildings knowing what's going on in their own selves, say, I can solve these ones, and these ones are real issues, and I can tell you, not by some simple rules that some guy programmed, but like root cause analysis, say, here's the issue that's going on, here's the part, I'm going to escalate that as a ticket, put it into the ERP system, and now a guy's going to roll a truck to the things that matter with the right part in the truck, right? That you can't do with a BMS, no matter how much stuff you put on top.
Yeah. The one thing I was curious of your take, I keep seeing these reports more broadly, like reports that just kind of always say like construction and building management is like always behind, or right? And our listeners, I hope they don't get angry for saying that. But oftentimes, and I have a friend who actually works in construction tech, and he says, yeah, but like no one dies on a work site anymore. So yeah, we're maybe not more productive, but we're much more safe, and that matters. And I think that does matter. So you can always take with a grain of salt these, but you could argue, to your point on like a lot of the AI tools, you're right. Like they're interesting, they're novel, they're maybe fun to use and try, but it's not like the 0 to 1 step change yet. But like where does that in your mind like leave buildings? Just because I think you got it.
I think there's two things here that I would separate that into two. One, so I think we're all in agreement that 0-1 hasn't happened. Frankly, it hasn't happened really in any market other than maybe the Google that we've talked about. But the 0 to 1 is now so tangibly evident to everyone that it's coming. And I think that is what's changed, right? When we talk about people's data strategies or technology strategies as an industry, we said, oh boy, we need to go, a decade ago, we're like, we need to transform ourselves technologically. A few years ago, like data-wise, all those were intangible. Now it's very tangible. This will happen. It absolutely is happening. The 0-1's been felt. It has not happened yet in this industry, but we know it's going to, so it's inevitable. So I think that's one thing that's really changed. And then the other one that I think I really like addressing this one of the conservatism of the construction industry. Because for our journey, I think this was not clear to us when we started. There's many things you find when you start from the problem and you work back to the solution, and you say, well, whose problem is it? And when we were starting, the key thing that I realized as I went from the big giant REITs down to the blue collar workers. And what happened to us in that initial go out to market under NDA, meeting with different players, is realizing, wait a second, it's the blue collar workers who are opening the doors wide initially, while the big REITs were trying to figure out a technology strategy like first hire. And the problem there that revealed itself was, gosh, nobody's actually built anything for any of these people, right? The laborers and the construction workers and the people who build all of the trillions of dollars worth of infrastructure we live and work and drive on every year, nobody's actually invited them into the story. Nobody's ever said, hey, what can I solve for you? And so largely why it goes slow, in my opinion, after observing this and then seeing the results when I take a product that's meant for those guys who are supposed to be conservative and they're like, hey, can I buy this yesterday? When can we engage? When can we partner? Is they're like everybody else. They want the latest, coolest products to do their job. And nobody's actually ever brought it to them. They've only been, let's go back to like where things like AI and tech have always played. Let's say I come out with an AI optimizer for your BMS.
Yeah.
And I sell that to the REIT. What the REIT does is goes down to the contractor and says, hey, contractor, you're already suffering under the weight of trying to wrangle the BMS 30-year-old technology. Why don't you also try to hook it up to this other thing? And I just made your job more complicated. And there's no good outcomes for you, right? Like, why would I, as the contractor, want to take that on? My life just got worse. So I think going back to that point is, I don't think this industry is any different than any other industry. What we uncovered along the way was that very few of the actual doers, the people who are actually the decision makers, were ever approached with, how can I make a product for you as opposed to a product for the other side of the market? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, it makes sense. I mean, I think the general point you're touching on is there's a big difference between the buyers and the users. They don't always connect. Yeah, I think.
But yet you go to Home Depot and those guys are in the aisle choosing what's the coolest, latest DeWalt driver they're going to buy, right? So they're not immune to wanting to buy awesome tools for themselves.
Yeah.
Well, the end user often gets overlooked, at least from what I've seen and heard. Just before we shift gears, there's clearly a lot of noise around AI, and you made a really good point that everyone the first iteration of we're using AI is either chatbots or LLMs, and maybe the next iteration is people vibe coding. I've just started my vibe coding journey, and it's very, very, very interesting. From your standpoint, as an AI first company, at least that's how you guys come across. Like, what's real versus what's hype?
Yeah. So look, I think one of the things that is the problem in the noise, and this is legit, that the market switched to AI as the future, and investors switched to I'm going to invest in AI, and that means every company with a new technology had to suddenly be an AI company. Let's be honest, most companies are just not AI companies. And even if you have some lightweight or even like a significant effort in like leveraging an LLM into your ecosystem, you're fundamentally, that's not what your solution that you're providing is as an AI company. So we're in a little bit of a weird world where we might have had things like smart buildings before, and that was its own euphemism. We have AI companies, it's its own euphemism now. What I don't want people to do is have that noise distract them from the big things that are actually happening, right? And even within the language models, I don't mean to demean the language models. I just think that market is actually maturing. And it's maturing to the point that like the open source models are within months of the leading models. And so as that matures and we say, okay, AI company, it does not make to slap an LLM on your company's software. How do we think about these other movements? And we can see them in other ways, right? So physical AI, as a physical AI company, it's very satisfying where we've been building tech stack in physical AI for many, many years to then see companies like Jensen or NVIDIA, Jensen gets up and puts physical AI as where this is all headed. So I think that's a pretty good framework for people of like, we have Gen AI today, right? Gen AI is language models. I like to clarify for people, there's nothing generative about Gen AI. Language models are interpretative, meaning they will give you answers within the bounding box of all the data you've given them. We are in the midst of a move to agentic AI, and we're seeing the first parts of that. If you run in vibe coding, a more agentic approach like Codex, where you can say, hey, I want to look at all my code, and it'll launch a bunch of agents and show you all these different problems, and you can click all those and get 100 simultaneous code workers. And we're headed towards physical AI, where the value really lies, because physical AI will do things for you, right? So far, we're going from question answer to agents that will do deeper research to AI technologies that will do literal work for us, whether that's passive logic in infrastructure or agility in humanoid robotics in a Amazon warehouse, or a Waymo that you can take to get day and see that actually at work, right? And so those things become very tangible, and there are literally hundreds or thousands of different industry initiatives right now that you see autonomous backhoes, and you see autonomous drywall robots in this industry that are like real efforts that are driving AI to the ground of like the real technology in real work that will give us real outcomes that have actual operational value. And those are things that I want people to keep their mind's eye on, like what's coming next.
Okay, nice. Yeah. So if we just shift gears slightly here, we almost, as an industry, we have two sides. We've got the technology vendor side, which we play some play a big part in. We play a big part in the disruptors, the innovators of such, and then you almost have the conglomerates, the big incumbents, and there's this big clash between big incumbents not changing, not innovating, and technology vendors potentially not doing what they say they're going to do, or potentially falling short. And I think you mentioned something really interesting that stuck with me on our prep call a couple of weeks ago, which was that these big incumbents, whilst great, have almost become financial engineering firms. I'd love to unpack that from your side.
Yeah, so this goes back to Joe's point about the conservatism in the industry. You have, who are the providers of technology, who are the incumbent providers, and who are the users, right? And so sometimes that slow of the industry is informed by what the incumbents are doing, not what could be done. And what's happened in this industry, I was just interviewing a guy yesterday who is from, Amazon today, but goes all the way back down to Novell. And we were talking about back in the 80s and 90s, Novell was one of the big five. You had Microsoft, you had Novell, you had IBM, you had Sun Microsystems, and Apple, right? Those would have been considered the big five. And nobody's talked about Novell in 20 years. And there's a reason, because they essentially went out of business in about 2000. And what happened to Novell is very much the story of this industry. So Novell was the biggest player in networking. They had networking technology that connected all their computers throughout the 80s and 90s. Networking was complicated. It required a lot of skilled labor. So what you did is you invented a services arm to your business, and you came up with certification classes, education, training. And what you found in Novell's case, and we'll get to our industry, by the early 90s, is the services arm of installing networking was worth more than the product arm that made the networking. So now you have a problem. Here you are in the early 90s, if you're Novell. You're saying, do I make networking technology plug and play and easy, put out of business the bigger arm of my company? You can't do that. So they stayed in their same lane until all of our computers just had Wi-Fi and Ethernet that you just plugged in, right? So let's go to our industry. Same thing happened. In the 80s and 90s, DDC, as we called it, or BMS or BAS, was like really technologically aligned with its time, right? Like in the 80s or 90s, what we were making as a building automation platform was the tech of its time. It was cool tech. And you had people flowing into the industry who were skilled, not just labor, but skilled programmers and engineers to work on cool tech. And then those companies found the same thing, that now they got into services and certification and training and all of the vans driving around. And if you go to any one of the big four, you'll find something on the order of 70% of their revenue is coming from service, not from product.
Yeah.
So now you have a problem. It doesn't matter who is the CEO of that company. If I'm the CEO of that company tomorrow, I have one job, which is to make more margin next quarter. And as one of the CEOs of one of those companies who was in my office a couple of years ago said, hey, I was just hired. I've got 3 years before I get fired. And in those 3 years, I need margins to go up, not down, to just evolve our platform, not talking about evolutions or even passive logic like revolutions. I would have to hire 100 engineers, work those 3 years, and I probably don't get it out the door before I'm fired, right? And what would happen is 100 engineers, that's $10 million negative net revenue for 3 years. On the other hand, if I fire 100 engineers, I just made $10 million for the company and I'm a hero, right? And so that's the reality of being a Fortune 50 company in a traditional lane. You are in a bind. Are you going to go to your shareholders and say, guys, guess what? We're going to actually cut our revenue in half. We're going to totally re-innovate the industry. And believe me, in 5 years, it's going to be better. If they could get there in 5 years, it's unlikely. That's just not likely to happen, right? And so we all have to recognize the bind that those kind of companies are in. And then you go to like a Google or an Apple who's like, they're also a really big company, but have at least convinced the market or built a revenue engine that allows them to innovate. And then we go to a startup company whose whole engine, the whole way that we get incentivized is to go do innovation, not over like weeks or months, but years, right? And it's just like it's a different game.
Yeah.
So that's the difference.
Yeah. It's funny because I've seen quotes from leaders of these companies that say like the automation business is the same, because like there are companies that have building automation, industrial automation. Like they even say like the code base is very similar. So they're like speaking to infrastructure the same way you have, Troy. But they say like we get the install base and we mine it for services, right? Like, I've seen like direct or nearly direct quotes. So that maps with what you were saying. I guess the counterpoint: these companies have been very, very profitable over the past couple of years, and I would think. I mean, I used to work at Johnson Controls, as you know, and like we spent millions of dollars on the product line I was working on, and I don't think that's a secret either. But I would argue, I mean, some of these companies say we're going to spend $1 billion a year on M&A, and you could argue, well, they're probably happy to like innovate a bit too and spend $100 million a year.
Now they are incentivized for M&A, and that's an interesting factor. So there is a bind in a lot of these companies that you get M&A dollars, but you don't necessarily get innovation versus can I use the same number of engineers that I have and tweak some things in the market to get a few percent more revenue this year and try to get luck in terms of some of these services that I have. But at the end of the day, we've seen this innovation cycle. It's happened time and time again. And we were referring to Novell. And we've all seen this poster where the number of logos, the top 100 logos in the 80s versus now, there's only a few percent of those logos left, right? And so what is true is not that big things stay big. What is true is big things will be disrupted by small things. That's the fundamental continuum of industry. And so I think in this industry, what I find super fascinating, one is we get to build really cool technology, and we'll talk more about what that is. But there's this moment in time right now in this industry that the big players have been, because of circumstances, leadership, all kinds of things. But like reality is they have been unable to innovate for arguably 2 decades. One could say the last major innovation in this industry was Tritium, which was a startup company, and it was purchased in 2006. And as one of the founders said to me, not too long ago, is like, when Honeywell bought that, it's not like it's evolved 20 years since then. They took that cow and they've just been milking it harder. And so here we are 20 years later from a purchase of what was arguably already a 5 to 10-year-old technology. And that's the status of the industry. And that's not due to demand. Demand is asking for a whole suite of new potential features beyond the BMS. How do we make, buildings a real technology asset? And we're still stuck in this old world just because the providers, and I'd say that they're also in a bind from a economic point of view, to be honest. If I look at their market, and we look market survey wise, I don't know, Joe, what your numbers are, but roughly I'd say 20% is BMS. When a project goes out, 20% is BMS, 15% is balance of systems, the rest is labor. And what we ask ourselves is how, and that makes those companies labor companies. Their multiples on the stock market are very, very low. I would say that makes them also potentially, reverse acquirable in the future when you see product companies that are 10 to 15 times multiples. And so the question in this industry is not necessarily on the back end about autonomous systems, but what we focus on is the autonomous generation of systems, which is how do I convert what is 65, 70% labor into 30% labor and productize the rest? That's a much more scalable business.
Yeah. I guess there are incumbents, they've been incumbents for a while. I mean, it sounds like you kind of have a bit of a roadmap of your goal is to replace them, maybe not in all buildings, but to start in certain buildings. I mean, I'd be interested in just like how you think through that, because I mean, the counterpoint of that is there are still folks who I talk to integrators who say, yeah, they just wanted to buy one of the big 4 controls products because there's confidence and reduction of risk. It's a little bit like the IBM issue of years past, right? Like no one gets fired for buying IBM. At some point that changed.
Yeah.
That was a different industry. So I don't know what.
Yeah. Honestly, that's my biggest over the last, say, 5 years of building this company. That's my biggest surprise. I expected that can't go wrong with IBM, wall to emerge, and this sort of, hey, this is fundamental infrastructure. There's a certain known quantity with the thing we've been doing for decades. And the thing that surprised me the most was actually 80, 90% of all doors opened wide and said, not only are you doing a deal with you not feel risky to me, but it feels like less risk than the risk we're in today with the existing product, that the mismatch between the market expectations and the existing products has become so risky that working with a new player feels like it's solving a major risk that a lot of these people are having. I'm not saying it's universal, but it is close to, it is the vast majority of responses. And with that often comes with us leading that first meeting with them saying, whatever you do, don't get bought by so-and-so, right? There's almost on the counterpoint of this, a conspiracy-like feeling in this industry that like everything good has been bought by the big guys and killed. It's not due to malice, right? Like we all know why this happens, but that's actually sort of built up as like this market concern of like, I do need something better. Things better did come along one at a time, but like they never seem to go anywhere because they get built up and or they get bought up by the big guys, and then they go away. And I'm not saying that, but that is like such a pervasive belief, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. I've heard that don't get bought by anyone because we just don't want anything to change. But your point, I don't disagree with your point either. It's a challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
So hopefully that,
And
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just going to say, I think the market has the appetite for change, but also over the last 2 to 3 years, with tools being stitched together, or maybe there's just an area of fatigue. So it's definitely an interest. Sorry,
Totally.
go ahead.
I just, on that, I was just with a group of CEOs from just a couple of months ago of some of the major REITs in North America. And that was their number one. It was all like polled, what is your number one issue? Point solution fatigue, right? They just can't and I want to just underscore the biggest problem in this industry is that we've been talking about these guys that do this work as integrators. What does that mean? Well, they are taking point solutions and integrating them, and it is starting to get beyond the scope of what a REIT or owner operator or the integrators can financially seriously achieve on any given project.
But that's an interesting point. But how does and again, I don't sell technology to a REIT, so how do you combat the fact that a point solution, a company who's selling a application per se, has a strong application for that REIT, but doesn't have the end-to-end solution? How are you seeing you combat that?
Yeah, so I think I'll go full circle to why PassiveLogic, why our approach of is saying, hey, what's needed is a modern platform that goes end to end. And it's not to say that we're trying to supply 100% solution. Nobody can do that. But it needs to be complete enough that you can not have to incur for the first, 10 or 20 integrations, that point solution integration problem that just comes. That's just part of that's like my laptop. I buy the laptop, I open it, it has all the basic stuff that I need in there, the networking that used to be Novell, the operating system's already up to date, it updates itself when I open it for the first time, and everything I need to go is there. It is crucial that this industry gets to that like plug and play, like I just install this, I have everything that somebody could want as a foundation. Now, whether it's from PassiveLogic or third parties, how do I plug those in? And it's also worth noting that what we haven't had in this industry, even though I think Tritium and others had solved, how do I plug in a few types of protocols on the bottom side of these things? There was no API layers to enable on the top side of the systems. How could we plug in all the different solutions that you go to a prop tech conference, and how do those guys actually get their stuff integrated into a building for real?
Yeah, and I think this is a great segue into some of the other areas that we're going to talk about. One of them being around autonomous buildings. If we just set the scene, I mean, from your side, Troy, how do you define autonomy for buildings?
Yeah, so let's talk about autonomy for cars, and we'll move it over to buildings, because I think everybody now understands what autonomy in a car is like. And if you don't, you can go get a ticket to San Francisco or LA and take a Waymo.
Need to do that.
Is it worthwhile?
Neither yet. Yeah.
So, in autonomy in a car, that car is spatially aware of itself. It knows that I'm here in the map. I need to go there. Maybe it has some other jobs along the way of where it has to go and waypoints. It knows how to stay in its lane, how to navigate traffic, how to avoid pedestrian, follow stoplights, and get from point A to point B in the most efficient way possible. Okay, now let's go to buildings. It turns out buildings are just like cars. In fact, our control path pipeline under the covers is conceptually not very different from a Waymo's control path pipeline. Mm-hmm. It starts from point A, not in space, but in time, and it has to navigate, how am I going to get to point B in time? Maybe that's 5 minutes from now, maybe it's an hour, maybe it's a day from now. And then you're looking down that tunnel of time, and just like the map, there are all of these pathways that I could be on in control space. Each one of those paths has branches, and here's the interesting part in decision making. At every decision I make, new universes spawn. That this decision in a minute from now, I can go 10 different ways. That's a spawning of 10 different paths. Each one of those, a minute from then, spawns new paths. And from now to an hour from now, I could have made maybe 10 billion different decisions to get to 10 billion different future universes. So what the control engine does in this tunnel of time is it says, what is the most efficient path to the most efficient or best outcome future universe that I want to be in? And that problem solves very, very similarly to the vehicle problem, because it's just pathfinding instead of two-dimensional map. This is actually this multi-dimensional map, because we're not just navigating one car, we're navigating this whole fleet of subsystems in the building. It might be heating systems, cooling systems, ventilation systems, occupancy systems. Maybe it's renewables. Maybe you have energy storage. Maybe you have hot water storage. Maybe you're negotiating rates with your district heating system. All these different things that are coming to play that you're co-navigating to these outcomes. And so at the end of the day, under the covers, it works the same, but I want you to think of how this changes. Like, let's go up, that's the control path pipeline. Let's go up one layer of say, how does this interact with us as people and what we want? The thing that people are most used to today is maybe setting a thermostat. Now, all those big players, the Siemens, Snyders, the Honeywells, the JCIs, this is why they all exist. They all invented the mercury switch thermostat somewhere in the late 1800s in different parts of the world. The first thing I want you to note about that is we're still using that same technology today. It doesn't matter if it's a Nest, doesn't matter if it's like, it could be whatever fancy thermostat you want to buy. It's just a digital representation of that same mercury switch thermostat with a website. So it didn't change anything. It didn't change about what we were solving in the building. And let's start with, in this, it's meant to solve comfort, right? Well, in comfort, we know air temperature is just one of like 10 different variables that goes into your comfort. The air temperature could be solidly 72 or 21 if you want to be in Europe. And the sunlight could come through the window and change the radiant temperature. You went from hot to cold to hot because the sun went in and out of the window. Temperature was solidly 72 the whole time. Mm-hmm. So the problem there is we're not solving for real outcomes. We're solving for arbitrary mid-level variables, right? So what the control path pipeline says, in this case of human comfort, we could talk about industrial systems later, is what I want is to be comfortable. You understand what my comfort is, work backwards to what that needs to be in terms of heating, cooling, ventilation, whatever, into my space. Solve that simultaneously for all spaces in the building, all at the same time, for all people. And then let's go to the plant or the HVAC system of how we can use the equipment there to most efficiently produce those outcomes. And so that's a very, very different way of thinking about what is now a control sequence. There's no longer sequences. You're thinking in terms of net outcomes. And the control path pipeline is delivering on the outcomes that you are saying are important to you. Does that make sense?
I think so. Joe?
No, it does. I was going to say it does to me. I think it's. I mean, I agree with your history in the market. I think when I talk to people, kind of bring this up, like owners and operators sometimes, or operators more so, is kind of a view of well, this is why it is this way. And I think the ambition of let's change it all is remarkable and impressive. It's just there's a lot there.
Let me maybe take it to that was so two things we'll stack on top. So the first thing in that storyline that I told you about how a control path pipeline works in an autonomous engine, the first thing that's interesting about this market is that unlike that Tesla, which has a hard-coded control path pipeline. All buildings are different. So
Yeah.
by the time this is released, we will have announced that we've released to markets, to industry, to our partners, full level 3 autonomy in the marketplace. I want to note that Tesla is still on level 2 plus after a long time, and they're hard coded to just being a car. This need in buildings is you need to feed it a model, what we'd call a world model of your building, your sensors, your control, your equipment, your control system, and that it can generally control for any system you give it. So that's what we call generative autonomy as opposed to autonomy. So a vehicle is one autonomous platform. In buildings, since every building's different, you need the ability for you to make your own custom autonomous platform and deploy it with your own custom world model for that building. And in that autonomous control, it turns out almost every problem that we have in control, we already know what we want, the answer to the problem. So imagine in all your math problems, you have all the answers, but you don't have all of the questions, all the inputs. And that's the net of all of the problems we have in control. So in control comfort, we know the answer, you want to be comfortable. We don't know the question, what should I do to the space of the building to make it comfortable? Once I do that and I end up with a control path, I have a new answer. This is the answer to my systems, my HVAC systems. They have to output this control path. What I don't know is the question is, how would I operate all the equipment to generate that in the most efficient way possible? And it turns out all control problems are like this. And so this is where AI and control path pipelines are really valuable. It gets to the root cause, what we want out of things, because we're solving for the answer to the equation that we know, but we don't know how to fill in the values to get there. First, does that help at all? And then I can give you one more example that takes it out of the comfort space and maybe makes it a little bit more obvious.
It makes sense. I think go for another example.
Okay, so now I'm going to take this from the simple use case of comfort to buildings are the containers of a lot of economy. And so when we talked about building automation, PassiveLogic's job is not to just replace building automation. Autonomous buildings is a much bigger superset of what building automation is today. So of course, there's the core systems, right? HVAC and lighting and things like this that have to be controlled. But some of the drivers in the partnerships are on the new space. So in industrial systems, if I have, say, an Amazon warehouse, and I have a truck that comes up to one of the dock bays, the door goes up. One, do I know the door went up? Do I know that a truck is there? Second, that when that door went up and it was humid outside because we're in the southeast, did that humidity condense on the floor and cause a scenario called sweaty slab syndrome that might cause that forklift to slip around? That would be very dangerous, holding a bunch of high value items. Now that truck goes onto the truck, pulls off a box. What's the most efficient path that maybe autonomous forklift needs to take to put it on a shelf, which is a piece of real estate that's in the vertical axis, that's open at the current time in a way that optimizes routes for both disaggregation and maybe you're going to even have a production line to the side where that not only hits a shelf, but it's going to come apart and into many pieces that are going to go and be assembled and go out another dock door on another truck. Today, a ERP system for construction knows the very, very outlines of 10% of that information. The rest of that can only be known in a system that holds the whole world model or digital twin of that space. And only that building infrastructure is capable of negotiating with the autonomous forklift and the autonomous shelving unit and and knowing the locality of all of those components within a world digital twin model to make the most efficient use of that space. Now, if I'm the owner of this space, let's say my cost per square foot is $10 a square foot on the lease. My energy costs are maybe $3, $4 a square foot. So I have opportunities to save there. That's valuable. But what I want us to turn to is the operational side, which may be on the $50 to $100 a square foot in terms of the value of that operational side of making the efficiencies of those systems that are living inside my building. So I want to like take us through 3 steps here. And there's, by the way, there's millions of different incarnations of this depending on who's the building owner, what are they doing. But we went from comfort for the occupants to an industrial system that needs that sort of robot of robots management, to let me go to another step of, once I have a digital twin cloud where I have all of my portfolio in that cloud, once that cloud has AI agents that I can create that do jobs for me, and once that cloud is connected to all my autonomous buildings, my buildings are now part of my workforce, right? My buildings are doing work for me that used to be done by a aging out management building management team. I have all sorts of operationalists and analysts who are doing work for me that I can now launch instead AI agents to do those work. And those AI agents are floating across the whole portfolio, working with each of the buildings. And I'll give you an example that's very, very tangible. And this, by the way, is right now, this is PassiveLogic today, not like, 5 years from now, that I can have an autonomous building. It knows about itself. It knows what's going on. The tenant can go up to our Hive screen and it could say, hey, Cortex, like, it's been hot in here. Can you cool down the space? And it can actionably make those changes, and the tenant may come by the next day and say, hey, it's still hot in here and it's been hot the last few days. Can you fix this? Now, CBRE and others have looked at this market and said, only 10% of problems actually need physical human intervention. So that means 90% of those problems are actually changeable by the system to be like, well, let me tweak some of the system parameters, see if I can get more cooling to you to solve that problem. Next day, hey, I'm still, it's a little warmer than I want it to be. Now that system can say, I've done everything that can be done. I can do the root cause analysis and send a ticket up to an actual human to roll a truck with the part in place to come solve the problem. I've now given the tenant a way better experience, right? They have an instantaneous building manager available at their beck and call. You all use ChatGPT. It's like the golden retriever of communicators. It's like makes you so happy. Why can't everybody else be like this? And connect that with real data and the actionability of the system to be able to work with the building to actually make changes. And then when it can't, get that efficiency of operations up to the team that can do the work without a huge amount of human labor that's aging out of the market. That is a critical problem. That's like a very real problem that every owner operator has.
One follow-up question, and then there's a few maybe to take us out to touch on. But one of the things I often hear though is there's like a human element to running a building, like especially for a tenant. Like I'm a tenant, I want to talk to somebody when I have a problem. Obviously, augmenting that with labor in the back, or augmenting the person or the labor with technology is bound to happen. But I guess I hear not often, but enough that it's like I don't want it to all be autonomous. I actually want a person to go talk to, which is a little different than I think the future you're describing.
So let me flip that in a different way. One of our core mandates here is how to make buildings more human-centric, right? So the thesis is buildings exist to be human-centric, but we're actually today not doing that great job of being human-centric. We talked about the thermostat example as that's still 1800s human centrism, not 2025. So how do we make the building adapting for the person, so the person doesn't have to bother the building's taking care of it behind the scenes to the best of its ability. The two, when you connect AI agents to the systems to make action, I believe you end up with a more human experience. I was on the phone with my airline for 2 hours trying to change a ticket. It was like a 1-minute LLM task if that LLM had the ability to make action in the system. How much happier would I have been to have that really golden retriever like LLM interface that is really happy to help me, never cranky, and just takes care of it? That's more human centric. And then when a human is needed, that getting that human there in an efficient way. And those humans that we have are spread thin today. This isn't about getting rid of humans. This is about how to make the humans that we have like able to be more responsive to the things that they need to be, so that they're not spread across 10 buildings trying to solve little tiny problems. The Hive's doing that. Our PassiveLogic's infrastructure is doing that, and you can have that human there in an hour or two with the right solution.
Got it. I mean, a big question that I think is probably going to come up with people who are listening to the podcast: where are you at in terms of scaling this, bringing it out to market? What are we going to see in the future? What can you share on that?
Yeah. So right now, PassiveLogic this year, so roll back. PassiveLogic has been building a lot of this tech for many years. So like OpenAI has been building their tech stack for a little bit longer than PassiveLogic's been around. And a lot of that tech stack was a decade before you noticed it 2.5 years ago, right? There's a lot of work. All these startups, these disruptions, they're not really disruptive behind the scenes. We do a lot of work for many years to get the stuff to the point that you notice. And then you're like, oh my gosh, disruptive. We last year started rolling out with key partners. This year, we've been signing volume agreements with core partners that we're rolling out within their infrastructure. Today, that's happening both in the US and European markets. We have product that is sampling in Asia right now that's been sent out literally yesterday. And so we're seeing within key partnerships where we're rolling out in volume. There's two answers to how to get engaged with PassiveLogic on a commercial level. One is, if you want to come in as a strong partner who we will give you focused time, we're happy to consider those things. Otherwise, what we call the self-serve market, which is the average MSI, the average SI using our product, is going to be in the beginning of 27. But we're rolling out. We just launched level 3 autonomy commercially. The Cortex agents as AI agents is technology today to all of our customers. We have 7 different software titles that work for different actors across that value chain. And those today are either in a state of full release or beta release with those customers. And that data cloud infrastructure and digital twin infrastructure with an AI API that you can create your own AI queries and AI agents, that's today for our partners and customers. So this is all very real time in terms of what's. And then when we look over the next 2 years, what's going to be some of the exciting moves. I am convinced by the beginning of Q2 we'll have level 4 autonomy out commercially from beta to commercial, and some of those software tools that allow you to engage with AI kind of in a more personal way than just language, like we're doing with ChatGPT, more available to more of the, not just our partners, but their tenants and some of the surrounding, maintenance firms.
Got it. And partners, I mean, you're looking at it both owners of buildings and the distributors and the integrators and the service providers to buildings. Those are both in scope for everything you were describing.
Yeah, those are both in scope for. So that's the way that we've been approaching this. There's a lot of companies that come to us about smaller things. And it's like that will be 2027. Where what I call our Waymo moment, where we're really focused on let's focus on key partnerships that have enough volume of engagement that we can put our energy into it at this point.
Okay, makes sense.
I guess the other kind of question, 1 or 2 questions to take us out. You described, I mean, when you're having ROI conversations, because at the end of the day, you're talking to a prospective customer.
Yeah.
There's the energy savings, there's the maintenance, there's the labor, are you touching on all of them? Do you find certain are more compelling, less compelling in terms of what you can actually bring to the market?
Yeah, so I'll maybe put the conversations in three buckets. So we started our engagements with MSIs where that initial demo of Autonomy Studio of how do you build an autonomous system versus what you're doing today to build a control system. In a half an hour demo, there's like the self-realization that happens almost every time that they're like, crap, you just showed me 6 to 8 weeks of work in 30 minutes, right? Instant ROI, no other discussion needed to happen. Everything after that is just like icing on the icing on the icing of the cake. So that's what we'd say is the MSI experience is like, that's a very self-evident half an hour demo to instant ROI. Why would you ever use the incumbents again? Then there's in the real estate owner operator market where the real estate companies have come to self-actualization of like, hey, we need to go from being a real estate company to a technology company. And we've been looking for what that looks like. That becomes a really easy conversation. That autonomous building system, not the same thing as automation system. And it's like very like easy conversation. And then the third category is when you get more nuanced and you're saying, okay, this customer is looking for a specific ROI, as opposed to this whole suite of ROIs in lots of different corridors. And in that, I would say that our process is a bit like Palantir with a forward deploy engineer, where you're saying, okay, I need to sit down with you and kind of be a strategic co-pilot and understand your business and crystallize your needs into how we can satisfy that, because there's not one ROI to be had here. There's hundreds of ROIs depending on your business use case. And that's the power of having a general purpose platform, right? So those come in all shapes and forms, whether it's like energy market optimization, internal energy efficiency optimization, internal subsystem like co-control, which is I think is one of the easy wins. All sorts of industrial needs. List goes on and on. And there's those become like, let me sort of understand your problems and guide you through.
I mentioned this earlier, but with where the industry's at right now, we almost have two sides: the tech vendors, the disruptors, the OEMs. Obviously, PassiveLogic plays into the disruptors, the innovators. But there's also a ton of companies that fit into that category. By 2027, let's say with grace, end of 2027, do you see PassiveLogic taking over that category as a whole, or do you see that still being the same dynamic, but PassiveLogic just being the leader, the forefront leader in that category?
And when you say that category, you mean
what you wouldn't class PassiveLogic as an OEM, so it'd be a technology vendor.
Okay. So I mean, you're saying compared to the incumbent OEM players that are there. Yeah. So I mean, look, we're going to, in the next few years, you're going to see in the next, say, 2-3 years, it's going to be the market leaders who are trying to establish a digital platform for their company. But as we get into that self-serve market and we start organizing more organically through channel, what we've seen there and what I can, promise by agreement is there's going to be a pretty rapid phase of takeover of what has been the traditional industry of building automation. What I could say for certain is that the last 100 years looks like Honeywell. The next 100 years looks like PassiveLogic. And right now, PassiveLogic is in a unique spot. This doesn't happen very often. And it's still kind of makes me scratch my head that we're still what we would call an N01 company in this space. There's no other PassiveLogic within, appearing on the edge of the market. And everything we see are these point solutions. And so that's not going to be true forever. But there's this next few year window, which will be really fun as we scale up. And imagine if Tesla or Waymo was the only one in that space. There's at least a dozen players in that space. Here, there's only one. And the space is arguably not, from the math, bigger space, right? So we're going to see that transition by 2030. I think things are going to start looking PassiveLogic going forward, whether that's PassiveLogic direct or us selling through other existing channel players.
Nice. Well, I think that's a great way to end the conversation. I think you've obviously been on a phenomenal journey. It's been great to get you on the podcast finally and really unpack that, especially after the latest raise.
Yep.
Troy, really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for having
being
me
here.
in.
Thanks for talking through everything with us.
Of course.